You will remain behind until the quarantine is lifted. Lady Cecily will accompany me to London." Duke Alistair Vale's announcement silenced the entire entrance hall. Duchess Rosamund stood before him, holding a copper basin stained with disinfectant, her sleeves rolled above her elbows and several strands of dark hair clinging to her damp temples. She had spent the night tending a tenant farmer's feverish children. The sharp scent of vinegar and rosemary still clung to her dress. At Alistair's side, Lady Cecily Harrow wore Rosamund's blue traveling cloak. A maid fastened its silver clasp beneath Cecily's throat, while 2 footmen carried the Duke's trunks toward the waiting carriage. Rosamund looked at the cloak before meeting her husband's eyes. "You ordered the roads sealed yesterday," she said. "No one is supposed to leave." "I ordered the village contained. I did not imprison myself." "There is no difference to an illness." A muscle tightened along Alistair's jaw. He had once admired the steadiness in her voice. During the first years of their marriage, he had listened while she explained crop failures, sanitation drains, and the remedies she had learned from her physician father. Lately, however, every correction sounded to him like a challenge to his authority. Lady Cecily lowered her eyes with carefully rehearsed concern. "Your Grace, perhaps Rosamund is merely exhausted." "I am not exhausted," Rosamund replied. 12 people are ill, and 3 of them are children. If the symptoms spread beyond Briar Glen, London must be warned, but we must not carry the infection there ourselves." Alistair stepped closer. "You have already terrified half the county with your predictions. I reported what I observed. You declared a quarantine without my permission. I asked your steward to stop villagers from drinking from the lower well after 2 families became sick. Mr. Hargreaves refused. I acted before more people were exposed. And now merchants will avoid my land, tenants will withhold rents, and every political enemy I possess will call Vale Estates diseased." There it was, not disbelief, Rosamund realized, but fear of humiliation. Alistair knew people were sick. He simply resented that she had discovered the danger before he had decided how it should be presented. Cecily moved nearer to him. "My uncle has influence at the Home Office. If Alistair reaches London quickly, he may prevent cruel rumors from spreading." "Then he should travel alone," Rosamund said. The Duke's expression hardened. Cecily's gloved hand rested upon the key ring at her waist. Among the smaller household keys hung a long brass one that Rosamund recognized immediately. "The treasury key," she said. Alistair did not look away. "Lady Cecily will manage the necessary expenses while I negotiate assistance." "That key belongs to the Duchess of Vale. It belongs wherever I place it." Rosamund set the copper basin upon a side table. Its rim struck the wood with a small, ringing note. "The physician requested medicines from York. Wagons carrying linen, grain, and quinine substitutes are expected within 2 days. I need access to the household accounts to pay the drivers and distribute the supplies. Hargreaves will oversee all deliveries." "The same man who refused to close the contaminated well?" "The same man who has served my family for 28 years. And I have been your wife for 9. Alistair's gaze flickered, but only for a moment. "You have mistaken marriage for permission to command my estate," he said. "Until the quarantine ends, you will hold no authority over the treasury, the servants, or the relief stores." Behind Rosamund, the housekeeper drew a quiet breath. The servants had gathered along the corridor, pretending to await instructions. Every one of them had heard. Alistair was not merely disagreeing with his wife, he was stripping her of authority before the household and placing another woman above her. Cecily touched his sleeve. "Alistair, must this be done publicly?" "You advised me that it must." Rosamund caught the alarm that flashed across Cecily's face. It vanished almost instantly. Alistair turned toward the assembled servants. "From this moment, all financial orders require Mr. Hargreaves's approval. Lady Cecily will retain the treasury keys. No carriage, horse, medicine, or household provision is to be released upon the Duchess's instruction alone. Several servants lowered their eyes. Mrs. Wren, the elderly housekeeper, did not. And if someone dies while Hargreaves considers whether a bottle of medicine is worth the expense? Rosamund asked. Then perhaps you should have considered the consequences before manufacturing a crisis. The accusation struck harder than his public rejection. You believe I invented the illness? I believe you enjoy being indispensable. For 9 years, Rosamund had balanced his tenant ledgers, inspected workers' cottages, and quietly repaired failures his pride would not allow him to acknowledge. She had never demanded public credit. She had believed protecting his people meant protecting the life they had built together. Now he used that devotion as proof of ambition. Cecily passed Rosamund on her way to the door. The blue cloak brushed against Rosamund's plain gray skirt, releasing the faint scent of orange blossom. The village will be perfectly safe under Mr. Hargreaves, Cecily murmured. Something metallic glimmered beneath her glove, a smear of green sealing wax on her thumb. Before Rosamund could examine it more closely, Cecily entered the carriage. Alistair paused on the threshold. If you disobey my instructions again, I will have the gates locked against you as well as the villagers. You are leaving frightened people without their duke. I am protecting everything their duchess has endangered. He descended the steps. Rosamund followed him into the courtyard as the guards dragged the quarantine barrier across the road. Heavy chains passed through the iron posts. Beyond them, villagers stood beneath the bare trees, watching the Duke prepare to flee the danger he insisted did not exist. A woman held a coughing child against her shoulder. An old miner removed his cap when he saw Rosamund, though fear had hollowed his face. Alistair climbed into the carriage beside Cecily without looking back. The wheels rolled over the wet gravel. Rosamund watched until the ducal crest disappeared beyond the northern bend. Then she turned toward the villagers. The lower well remains closed, she called. Boil every bucket drawn from the chapel pump. Families with fever are to report to the schoolhouse. No one will be abandoned. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Mrs. Wren stepped across the courtyard and stood beside her. I suppose His Grace forgot to forbid us from volunteering, the housekeeper said. By evening, the abandoned schoolhouse had become an infirmary. Rosamund scrubbed tables with vinegar, separated the sick from the recovering, and taught volunteers to burn contaminated straw. She marked every medicine bottle in her own hand and recorded each patient's symptoms by hour. The work steadied her. Anger could wait. Fever could not. 2 days later, the promised relief wagons appeared at the southern gate. Hope swept through Briar Glen. Men hurried forward to unload the crates, while mothers gathered outside the schoolhouse. According to the manifest, the shipment contained 40 boxes of medicine, clean bandages, soap, lamp oil, and dried food. Rosamund broke the first crate open. Stones lay beneath a thin covering of folded linen. The second held sawdust. The third contained 6 bottles, 4 of them already empty. No, whispered the village physician. This cannot be everything. Rosamund seized the manifest from the driver. 40 crates had left York. Every page bore an authorization signature. Her signature. It says you received payment for the missing goods, the driver said. Mr. Hargreaves told us you changed the destination of the other wagons. I gave no such order. Hooves thundered beyond the gate. A magistrate's carriage approached under armed escort. Mr. Hargreaves sat inside, clutching a leather account book against his chest. The driver glanced from the forged document to Rosamund. They are coming to arrest someone, Your Grace. Rosamund stared at the false signature while the guards began unlocking the barrier. In 72 hours, the sick would exhaust the medicine that remained. She might have far less time to prove who had stolen the rest. The magistrate's carriage stopped beyond the quarantine barrier. Mr. Hargreaves descended first, dressed in a black coat too immaculate for a man supposedly managing a public emergency. Magistrate Edwin Pike followed, covering his mouth with a folded handkerchief. 4 armed constables remained behind them. No one crossed the boundary. Duchess Rosamund Vale, Pike called. You are accused of diverting relief supplies purchased with ducal and county funds. Rosamund held up the manifest, upon whose testimony Hargreaves pressed the leather account book to his chest. The records speak for themselves. Then bring them inside. The magistrate glanced uneasily toward the schoolhouse windows. I will conduct the inquiry from this side of the gate. Convenient, Rosamund replied. You may accuse infected villagers of theft without risking proximity to them. A murmur spread through the crowd. Hargreaves approached the iron bars. His pale eyes settled upon the opened crates behind Rosamund. 40 crates left York, he said. Your written order redirected 34 of them to a private warehouse. You received £300 in return. Where is this warehouse? The document does not say. Who delivered my alleged order? A courier. His name? He did not provide one. Rosamund almost laughed, but the village physician's worried expression stopped her. They did not have time for theatrical outrage. 6 bottles of medicine stood between 12 patients and catastrophe. Show me the order, she said. Hargreaves withdrew a folded sheet from the account book and passed it through the bars using a pair of iron tongs. Rosamund accepted it by one corner. Her name appeared beneath instructions to divert the wagons. At first glance, the signature resembled hers, the long upward stroke of the R, the compressed final letters, even the small line she usually placed beneath formal authorizations. But the handwriting above it was too smooth. Rosamund wrote financial orders with a steel nib that left slight splits at the beginning of each downward stroke. This document showed no such marks. When was this signed? She asked. 3 days ago. I spent that entire day inside the schoolhouse. 27 people saw me. A duchess possesses servants, Hargreaves said. You could have sent it through any one of them. Then name the servant. His lips thinned. You are in no position to interrogate me. Rosamund turned the page toward the light. A faint emblem appeared within the paper. A crowned stag surrounded by the words Harrow and Sons. Lady Cecily's family owned Harrow Mills. Rosamund remembered the smear of green sealing wax on Cecily's glove. That same wax secured the folded order. For one fierce instant, she wanted to announce what she had discovered, but a watermark was not proof of forgery. Harrow paper was sold throughout the county, and Cecily could claim she had touched any sealed household letter. Rosamund folded the sheet. What precisely do you intend to do, magistrate? Pike consulted a document. Under ordinary circumstances, I would escort you to the county jail pending examination of the accounts. The quarantine makes that impossible. You will therefore remain confined within Vale House under guard. The infirmary requires me. Mr. Hargreaves will appoint a suitable replacement. A shout erupted from the villagers. No! It came from Martha Pell, whose 7-year-old son lay in the schoolhouse with a raging fever. She pushed through the crowd, her apron stained from carrying boiled water. Her Grace saved my 2 daughters, Martha said. Hargreaves would not even close the poisoned well. Others joined her. The Duchess brought food to our cottages. She slept beside the sick. She stayed when the Duke left. Hargreaves's face darkened. Silence. You address an officer of the estate. An elderly miner stepped forward. You stopped being our officer when you let our children drink filth. The crowd surged toward the gate. The constables lifted their muskets. Stand back, Pike cried. Rosamund moved between the villagers and the weapons. Everyone return to the schoolhouse yard, she ordered. No one gives them a reason to use force. The anger behind her did not disappear, but the villagers obeyed. One by one, they withdrew from the gate. Magistrate Pike stared after them. Rosamund saw the uncertainty enter his face. Hargreaves had expected a disgraced noblewoman isolated among hostile tenants. Instead, the entire village responded to her voice. You have your confinement, she told Pike. I will remain within the quarantine district, but I will not abandon my patients. If you attempt to remove me from the infirmary, you may explain every resulting death before the county coroner. You cannot dictate terms. Neither can you place a healthy replacement among infected patients without violating the quarantine order bearing Duke Alistair's own seal. Pike hesitated. Hargreaves leaned close and whispered to him. Rosamund caught only 2 words: London and scandal. At last, the magistrate cleared his throat. You may continue supervising the infirmary under guard. All documents, keys, and financial records in your possession are to be surrendered. Rosamund removed the household keyring from her pocket. It opened linen cupboards, food stores, and the small dispensary. Without it, even Mrs. Wren would need Hargreaves's permission to retrieve supplies. She closed her fingers around the ring. You already emptied our medicine crates, she said. You will not lock away what remains. Hargreaves stepped nearer to the gate. Defiance will worsen your position. No, Mr. Hargreaves, it will worsen yours. Before he could respond, a boy came running from the direction of the chapel. His boots slipped in the mud, and terror had drained all color from his face. Your Grace, he shouted. The lower well. Someone broke the boards. Rosamund spun toward him. There's a dead man beside it, the boy gasped. One of the wagon drivers. Hargreaves went utterly still. Rosamund saw his fingers tighten around the leather account book. Which driver? She asked. The one who brought the missing crates. He was holding this. The boy opened his hand. On his palm lay a brass token, stamped with the crest of Harrow Mills, and smeared with the same green wax Rosamund had seen on Cecily's glove. Rosamund closed her fingers around the brass token. Do not touch the body, she told the boy. Go directly to the schoolhouse, wash your hands with boiled water and soap, then tell Dr. Mercer what happened. The boy nodded and ran. Across the barrier, Mr. Hargreaves recovered from his momentary shock. That token proves nothing, he said. Harrow Mills employs hundreds of drivers. Rosamund studied him. I did not say it proved anything. The steward's face stiffened. Magistrate Pike glanced at him, then at the green wax smeared across the token. We must examine the dead man. We? Rosamund asked. You refused to enter the village when you believed only my patients might die. A suspicious death changes the matter. No, it changes what the matter may cost you. Pike flushed, but Rosamund had already turned away. She selected 2 men who had survived the first fever and instructed them to bring a shutter from the abandoned cottage nearby. No one would carry the dead driver through the village uncovered. She then asked Dr. Mercer to meet her at the lower well with vinegar, linen, and his examination instruments. 1 constable was ordered to accompany them. The others remained outside with Hargreaves and the magistrate. The driver lay on his side beside the broken boards, one arm stretched toward the water. His boots were caked with pale clay that did not match the dark soil surrounding Briar Glen. A narrow bruise circled his throat, but there was no rope nearby. Dr. Mercer knelt without touching him. He did not die of the fever, he said. Strangulation? Possibly, but look at his lips. A blue-gray stain darkened the dead man's mouth. Rosamund recognized the bitter scent before the physician opened the man's coat. Prussic acid? Something similar, fast enough to stop his heart, though the mark on his throat suggests someone wanted the death to resemble violence, or wanted us to look at the throat instead of the poison. Rosamund searched the ground. 1 set of boot prints approached from the chapel path. Another, narrower pair led toward the old northern road, the route Alistair's carriage had taken 2 days earlier. Near the driver's hand, the mud had been disturbed in a rectangular shape. He was carrying something larger than the token, Rosamund said. The constable shifted uneasily. Perhaps his killer took it, or he hid it before dying. She examined the broken boards covering the well. They had been pried loose, yet the nails were clean. Whoever removed them had done so recently and deliberately. Lower the bucket, she told one of the villagers. Dr. Mercer caught her arm. The water may be contaminated. That may be exactly what someone wants us to believe. They attached a hook to the well rope and lowered it slowly. On the third attempt, metal scraped against stone. The men pulled up a small iron dispatch box. Water streamed from its sides. Its lock had been smashed, but the lid remained wedged shut. Rosamund wrapped her hands in linen before opening it. Inside lay several soaked invoices, a driver's route book, and a folded map. Most of the ink had blurred, but the route book's final page remained readable. 34 crates had been delivered to a warehouse at Greyhaven Wharf. The recipient was listed only as C.H. Rosamund unfolded the map. A red circle marked Greyhaven, a private riverside property owned by the Harrow family. Beside it, the driver had written, "Second delivery after village closes. H says deaths will hide the shortage." Dr. Mercer read the line twice. "They expected people to die," he whispered. Rosamund's stomach tightened. The theft of the medicine had not been a hurried crime committed after the outbreak. Someone had planned to exploit the quarantine before it began. She turned the wet page and found a list of payments. The earliest entry was dated 6 weeks earlier. At that time, no villagers had reported fever. How could they know the village would close? The constable asked. Rosamund looked toward the lower well. Perhaps they had not merely anticipated the outbreak. Perhaps they had caused it. A church bell rang from the center of the village. 3 rapid peals, the signal Rosamund had established for a medical emergency. Dr. Mercer rose. Another patient. They hurried back to the schoolhouse. Inside, 2 volunteers were restraining a minor whose body convulsed against the cot. Martha Pell stood nearby, weeping as her young son began coughing blood into a linen cloth. Both worsened at the same moment, Mrs. Wren said. They were improving this morning. Rosamund checked the medicine table. 1 brown bottle stood uncorked. Its label bore her handwriting, but the liquid inside smelled sharper than the preparation she had mixed. Who administered this? A new volunteer, Martha said. He claimed Mr. Hargreaves sent him. Rosamund turned toward the doorway. A thin man in a gray coat was slipping through the crowd. "Stop him," the constable lunged, but the stranger shoved a woman aside and ran into the street. Villagers pursued him toward the quarantine gate. Rosamund could not follow. The miner's breathing had become shallow, and Martha's son was losing consciousness. "What was in the bottle?" Dr. Mercer asked. Rosamund dipped a silver spoon into the liquid. Almost immediately, its surface darkened. "Antimony," she said. "Someone poisoned them." They worked desperately. Dr. Mercer induced vomiting, while Rosamund prepared charcoal and warm water. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour before the miner's convulsions eased. Martha's son remained frighteningly still, but his pulse endured. When Rosamund finally emerged from the schoolhouse, the constable stood waiting. "The man escaped through a drainage culvert beneath the eastern barrier," he reported. "But he dropped this." He handed her a folded letter. The message was addressed to the stranger and contained only one instruction: ensure 3 deaths before the royal inspector arrives. The Duchess must appear incompetent. Beneath it was the initial H. Rosamund examined the wax. Not green this time, but black, the color used by the Vale Estate Office. She looked toward the gate, where Hargreaves had been standing less than an hour earlier. He and Magistrate Pike were gone. "Where is the steward?" she demanded. The constable lowered his eyes. "Mr. Hargreaves departed for London. He said the Duke had summoned him." Rosamund stared at the letter. Alistair had given Hargreaves control of the relief supplies, the household accounts, and every road leaving the estate. By stripping Rosamund of authority, he had handed the conspirators everything they required, and now Hargreaves was traveling directly toward him. Rosamund sent a warning to London before Hargreaves could reach the Duke. The quarantine guards refused to carry her letter beyond the barrier, so she copied the evidence onto thin paper, sealed it inside a glass medicine vial, and gave it to Thomas Reed, the village's 15-year-old chimney sweep. "There is an abandoned drainage tunnel beneath the eastern orchard," Thomas said. "The gray-coated man used it to escape. I can follow the same path. You may encounter him. I know every hiding place between here and the northern road." Rosamund hesitated. She would not sacrifice a child merely because the adults entrusted with the estate had betrayed them. Thomas understood her silence. "My mother is in the schoolhouse," he said. "If those medicines remain at Greyhaven, I want to help bring them back." Rosamund tied the vial securely beneath his shirt. "Deliver it directly to Sir Gideon Shaw, the Royal Medical Inspector. Trust no servant wearing the veil or Harrow crest." Thomas slipped through the tunnel before dawn. While he traveled north, Rosamund turned her attention to the outbreak itself. If someone had deliberately poisoned the lower well, the original illness might not be contagious at all. She and Dr. Mercer compared every patient's movements during the week before symptoms appeared. 11 of the 12 original patients had drunk from the lower well. The 12th, an elderly seamstress, had eaten soup prepared with its water. "No illness has appeared among the families using the chapel pump," Mercer said. "Then the quarantine is hiding a poisoning. Whatever entered the water caused fever, vomiting, and weakness slowly enough to resemble disease." Rosamund examined the miner's blood-stained cloth. Its metallic scent reminded her of runoff from Alistair's abandoned dye works above the village. The factory had closed 4 years earlier after she discovered unsafe chemicals leaking into the river. Alistair had resented the loss of income, but he had eventually permitted her to seal its storeroom. Only the Duke, his steward, and Rosamund possessed keys. Hargreaves now controlled 2 of them. They climbed the hill to the dye works with 4 villagers and the lone constable who had remained behind. The factory windows were boarded, but the main door showed fresh scratches around the lock. Inside, dust covered the floor except for a trail of recent footprints. Several chemical barrels had been moved. One stood open beside a wooden cart, its black residue carrying the same bitter mineral odor Rosamund had detected in the patient's clothing. Dr. Mercer's face paled. This would contaminate the well if emptied into the drainage channel. Rosamund followed the wheel marks to a rear door. Beyond it, the ground sloped toward a stone culvert, feeding directly into the lower well. The outbreak had not begun naturally. Someone had manufactured a crisis, closed the village, stolen the relief supplies, and expected the dead to conceal the accounts. A movement sounded overhead. The constable looked up. "Who is there?" A lantern crashed from the loft. Flames raced across the chemical-stained floor. "Out," Rosamund shouted. Smoke engulfed the factory. One villager reached the rear door, but a falling beam blocked the others. Rosamund covered her mouth and searched through the darkness until she found a narrow maintenance hatch beneath the stairs. She kicked it twice. The swollen wood refused to move. The constable struck it with the butt of his musket. On the third blow, the hatch split open. They crawled into the drainage channel seconds before the barrels exploded. The force hurled Rosamund against the stone wall. Heat swept through the tunnel behind them. Dr. Mercer pulled her forward while burning debris collapsed across the entrance. When they emerged near the lower well, Rosamund's palms were bleeding and half her skirt was scorched. Above them, black smoke rose from the factory, destroying the clearest proof of deliberate contamination. "Someone was waiting for us," Mercer said. Rosamund looked back toward the hill. A horseman appeared briefly against the flames before galloping toward the eastern woods. The gray-coated poisoner had returned. That afternoon, Magistrate Pike reappeared outside the quarantine gate. This time he brought 8 constables and a written order bearing Alistair's signature. "By command of the Duke of Vale," Pike announced, "Duchess Rosamund is to surrender all control of the village and submit to confinement at Vale House." Rosamund took the document through the bars. The signature was genuine. Alistair had received Hargreaves in London and chosen to believe him, again. "What charges does my husband name? Misappropriation of relief funds, obstruction of a lawful inquiry, and destruction of estate property." A stunned silence fell over the villagers. Hargreaves had poisoned the well and burned the factory, yet Alistair accused Rosamund of destroying it. Pike gestured toward the smoke. The evidence is visible from here. The evidence was inside that building, conveniently burned before it could be inspected. Rosamund lowered the order. You may tell the Duke that I will answer before a royal inspector, not a steward he has empowered to conceal his own crimes. Pike's expression became almost regretful. Sir Gideon Shaw will not be coming. Rosamund's composure faltered. Why? His office received a message stating that the outbreak was fabricated and his presence unnecessary. The letter bore your signature. Hargreaves had intercepted her official request before the quarantine began. Pike signaled to the constables. 2 men carried forward a portable brazier. Another held a bundle of straw and oil-soaked cloth. If you do not surrender, the magistrate said, I am authorized to burn the schoolhouse and every contaminated structure within the village. Martha Pell tightened her arms around her recovering son. The villagers moved protectively around Rosamund, but she saw muskets rising on the opposite side of the gate. Resistance would turn Briar Glen into a battlefield. Then a whistle pierced the air from the eastern orchard. Thomas Reed emerged from the drainage tunnel, breathless and covered in mud. He was not alone. Behind him came a silver-haired gentleman wearing the royal physician's insignia, and 12 mounted officers carrying the king's colors. Sir Gideon Shaw looked from the armed constables to the brazier waiting beside the schoolhouse. Magistrate Pike, he called, step away from that fire. Sir Gideon Shaw ordered the brazier extinguished before entering the quarantined village. Unlike Magistrate Pike, he did not cover his face or hesitate at the barrier. He washed his hands in the vinegar basin Rosamund provided, changed into a plain linen coat, and instructed his officers to record the names of every person present. Who authorized the destruction of the schoolhouse? He asked. Pike held out Alistair's order, the Duke of Vale. Sir Gideon read it without expression. And upon whose medical judgment did his grace rely? Mr. Hargreaves informed him that the Duchess had fabricated the outbreak. A steward offered a medical judgment, and you brought fire. Pike's confidence faded. Sir Gideon folded the order and placed it inside his case. You will remain available for questioning. Your constables now answer to the crown. The royal officers confiscated the weapons and opened the quarantine gate only long enough to admit fresh medical supplies. Rosamund watched crates of soap, linens, food, and medicine pass into the village. Relief washed through her so powerfully that she had to brace one hand against the gate. Sir Gideon noticed the burns across her palms. Mrs. Vale, Duchess Rosamund, she corrected quietly. My husband may remove my household authority, but he has not yet removed my name. A trace of approval touched the inspector's face. Then show me everything, Duchess Rosamund. She began with the patients. For 4 hours, Sir Gideon examined symptoms, questioned families, tested water samples, and inspected the brown bottle used to poison the recovering patients. Rosamund gave him the forged order, the brass harrow token, the driver's route book, and the message dropped by the gray-coated stranger. She did not exaggerate what each item proved. The token connects the dead driver to Harrow Mills, not necessarily to Lady Cecily, she explained. The black wax came from the Vale office, but anyone with access could have used it. The initial H may indicate Hargreaves, Harrow, or someone else entirely. And your husband gave both parties access, Sir Gideon said. Yes. The single word hurt more than she expected. Alistair had not poisoned the well. He had not forged her signature or stolen the medicine, but he had dismissed her warning, humiliated her publicly, and surrendered control to the very people who benefited from silencing her. He had been offered a choice. He had chosen pride. By nightfall, Sir Gideon reached his preliminary conclusion. Briar Glen had not suffered a contagious outbreak. The villagers had been exposed to a mineral compound placed deliberately in their water. The quarantine could not yet be lifted. The poisoner remained free, and the lower well required sealing. but the villagers were no threat to the surrounding county. Church bells rang when Rosamund announced the finding. Martha Pell embraced her son. Miners lifted Thomas Reed onto their shoulders, praising the boy who had brought the inspector through the drainage tunnel. Even Dr. Mercer allowed himself a tired smile. Rosamund felt no triumph. 34 medicine crates remained missing. One driver was dead, and Hargreaves was with Alistair in London. Sir Gideon joined her outside the schoolhouse. "I sent riders to Greyhaven Wharf," he said. "If the supplies remain there, they will be seized before dawn." "And Hargreaves? Another officer has gone to London with an order for his detention. He will deny everything. Then we shall require more than a frightened courier's notes." Rosamund looked toward the distant glow where the dye works had burned. "The Vale Estate Office keeps duplicate shipping ledgers. Hargreaves controlled the official books, but my husband's late father required every quarterly account to be copied by hand." "Where are the copies?" "In the archive room at Vale House, which Hargreaves's men now guard." Rosamund nodded. "He believes I surrendered every key." From beneath her sleeve, she produced a narrow iron key blackened with age. "My father-in-law gave me the archive key after I discovered that one of his agents had altered tenant rents. Alistair never knew I retained it." Sir Gideon studied her face. "If the conspirators realize those records exist, they will destroy them. They may already have begun." Within the hour, Rosamund led 6 royal officers through an underground passage connecting the old chapel to Vale House. Mrs. Wren had used it during childhood games and remembered where the concealed door opened behind the library panel. The house was nearly dark. Hargreaves's deputy and 2 armed servants guarded the main staircase, unaware that Rosamund had entered below them. She reached the archive room and unlocked it. Shelves climbed from floor to ceiling, filled with decades of estate accounts. The air smelled of dust, leather, and drying ink. Rosamund found the current shipping volumes missing, but an older ledger had been left open upon the desk. Someone had searched it hurriedly. A loose sheet protruded from the binding. Rosamund pulled it free. It was not a shipping record. It was a loan agreement between Alistair and Cecily's uncle, Lord Harrow. The Duke had borrowed £20,000 to finance his political campaign. Repayment was due within 1 month. If Alistair failed, Harrow would acquire the dye works, Greyhaven road rights, and nearly half the tenant farms surrounding Briar Glen. Sir Gideon read the final clause. "Harrow needed these properties emptied before taking possession," he said. "The poisoning made the tenants appear diseased," Rosamund replied. "The quarantine destroyed land values and prevented witnesses from following the stolen wagons." Footsteps sounded outside. The archive door handle turned. Rosamund extinguished her candle just as the door opened. Lady Cecily entered carrying Rosamund's blue traveling cloak over one arm and a bottle of lamp oil in her hand. She was supposed to be in London. Behind her stood the gray-coated poisoner. "Burn every shelf," Cecily told him. "This time, make certain the Duchess is inside." Lady Cecily uncorked the lamp oil. The gray-coated man stepped into the archive and closed the door behind him. In the darkness, he failed to see Rosamund pressed between 2 shelves, or the royal officers concealed along the opposite wall. "Begin with the ledgers," Cecily ordered. The old fool copied everything. "You said the Duchess would be alone," the man whispered. "She is alone. Shaw's officers are guarding the village." Rosamund recognized his voice. He was the volunteer who had poisoned Martha Pell's son. Cecily placed the lamp oil upon the desk and struck a match. Sir Gideon emerged from behind the shelf. "You were misinformed." Cecily dropped the match. It extinguished against the stone floor. The poisoner lunged for the door, but 2 officers seized him before he reached it. He fought wildly, drawing a short knife from his coat. Rosamund caught Cecily's wrist as she attempted to throw the lamp oil across the open ledger. Cecily twisted free and slapped her. The sound cracked through the archive. Rosamund did not strike back. Instead, she picked up the loan agreement and held it beyond Cecily's reach. You poisoned families to empty land your uncle intended to seize. You cannot prove that. I can prove the missing medicine went to Greyhaven. I can prove your family's paper was used for the forged order. And Sir Gideon heard you command this man to burn the records. Cecily's composure fractured. My uncle arranged the finances. Hargreaves managed the village. I never touched the water. No, you merely took the treasury keys, silenced my authority, and helped them conceal the deaths. Alistair gave me those keys willingly. The words landed exactly where Cecily intended. Rosamund had no answer, because they were true. Sir Gideon ordered Cecily and the poisoner placed under guard. As the officers bound the man's hands, a glass vial slipped from his pocket and shattered. A bitter odor spread through the room. "Do not touch it," Rosamund warned. She recognized the compound from the dye works. Sir Gideon ordered the evidence collected in sealed containers. The man refused to give his name, but a search of his coat revealed payments signed by Hargreaves and a warehouse pass stamped by Harrow Mills. There was still no document directly ordering the poisoning. Cecily understood the gap. "My uncle employs thousands," she said. "A token and a warehouse pass do not connect me to murder." That man could have obtained them anywhere. Rosamund looked at the blue traveling cloak draped across the desk. Its hem was stained with pale gray clay, the same clay found on the dead driver's boots near the lower well. "Where did you go after leaving with my husband?" she asked. "To London." "Greyhaven lies east, London lies south." Cecily glanced down. The stain extended several inches above the hem, mixed with dried river mud. Someone wearing the cloak had walked along the wharf. Rosamund lifted it carefully. Something hard shifted inside the lining near the silver clasp. The stitches had been opened and re-sewn. Mrs. Wren provided scissors. Inside the lining, Rosamund found a folded sheet protected by waxed cloth. Cecily rushed forward, but an officer restrained her. It was a list of the stolen crates, the buyers who had purchased them, and the payments due to Lord Harrow. At the bottom appeared a final instruction in Cecily's handwriting. "When the third bell rings, send Rook to the well. No surviving driver. No remaining books." The gray-coated man stopped struggling. "So your name is Rook," Sir Gideon said. Cecily's face turned white. "You cannot use that," she said. "It was found inside the Duchess's own cloak." "My cloak," Rosamund replied, "which you wore when you left Briar Glen." Cecily stared at the silver clasp, as if it had betrayed her. She had hidden the list before entering London, intending to keep evidence against her uncle and Hargreaves, should they refuse to pay her. Then she had returned to destroy the archive without remembering that the paper remained sewn inside the garment she had stolen. Sir Gideon handed the list to his clerk. "Lady Cecily Harrow, you are detained on suspicion of conspiracy, theft of Crown relief supplies, attempted murder, and the killing of a material witness." Cecily's chin lifted, though terror trembled beneath her defiance. "Alistair will release me." "No," Rosamund said, "he cannot." At that moment, hoofbeats thundered across the courtyard. A man shouted from the entrance hall, followed by the heavy strike of the front door's opening. Alistair had returned. He entered the archive still wearing his traveling coat, with Hargreaves at his side. Rage hardened his features when he saw royal officers surrounding Cecily. "Release her immediately," he ordered. No one moved. His gaze found Rosamund. "You defied my command, broke into a sealed archive, and detained a guest beneath my roof." Rosamund held the evidence list against her burned palm. "She is not your guest. She is under royal arrest." Hargreaves leaned close to the Duke. "Your Grace, she has manufactured all of this." Exactly as I warned, Rosamund watched Alistair's expression. This was another moment in which he could stop, examine the evidence, and choose truth over pride. Instead, he crossed the room and tore the list from her hand. "You will not destroy Cecily's reputation to save your own." Rosamund's last hope for him went still, "Read it," she said. Alistair looked down. Before his eyes reached the final instruction, Hargreaves drew a pistol from inside his coat and pressed its barrel against the Duke's back. "No, Your Grace," the steward whispered. "I do not believe you should." Alistair stopped breathing. The pistol barrel pressed harder against his spine, while Hargreaves reached over his shoulder and snatched Cecily's list from his hand. "Everyone lower your weapons," the steward said, "or the Duke dies before he understands how thoroughly his wife has ruined him." Royal officers drew their pistols, but did not fire. Hargreaves positioned Alistair between himself and the room, inching backward toward the archive door. Cecily stared at him from between her guards. "You promised my uncle there would be no violence against Alistair." "I promised Lord Harrow whatever persuaded him to finance the scheme." "You work for him," Hargreaves laughed once. "I have worked for the Vale family for 28 years. Do you know what that earned me? A room above the stables, and the privilege of watching fools inherit everything." His eyes shifted to Rosamund. "Except you. You noticed too much from the beginning." "Then why did you allow me to close the dye works?" she asked. "I needed the chemical stock left untouched. You preserved it perfectly." Alistair's face changed. The contamination had come from property under his control. Hargreaves had used barrels Alistair refused to dispose of because their contents still carried financial value. Rosamund kept her voice calm. "You forged my orders, redirected the medicine, and killed the driver when he tried to preserve the records. He became sentimental after seeing the sick children." "And the outbreak? Enough mineral runoff to produce fear, not mass death. Your little infirmary threatened everything. People were recovering too quickly. So you sent Rook to poison them again." Hargreaves's smile disappeared. "You should have obeyed your husband and remained in the house." Alistair flinched. The sentence echoed his own command. Rosamund saw the realization settle over him. Hargreaves's entire plan depended upon her being silenced, and Alistair had performed that task willingly. He had publicly discredited the only person capable of detecting the crime and handed the steward control of every resource she needed. But recognition came too late to undo the danger. Hargreaves dragged him into the corridor. "Bring Lady Cecily," he demanded. "She is leaving with us." Cecily recoiled. "No. You carry your uncle's correspondence in that foolish cloak. I require it." Sir Gideon nodded to the officers holding her. They released one arm, but remained close. Rosamund understood his intention. Moving Hargreaves into the open hall would give the marksman a clearer angle. Then Rook tore free. He drove his shoulder into an officer, seized the broken chemical vial from the evidence table, and threw it against the nearest lantern. Blue flame erupted across the floor. Smoke filled the narrow archive within seconds. Officers rushed to smother the flames, while Hargreaves pulled Alistair toward the staircase. Rosamund followed. "Do not come closer," Hargreaves shouted. Alistair's gaze met hers through the smoke. For the first time since his return, there was no accusation in it, only shame and fear. "Let her go," he told Hargreaves. "Whatever you want, take it from me. You have nothing left to offer. Harrow owns your debt. Your political allies have abandoned you, and by tomorrow every newspaper in London will report that your wife stole plague relief." "That story is finished," Rosamund said. She stood at the end of the corridor, keeping Hargreaves' attention upon her as Sir Gideon's men moved silently through adjoining rooms. "The missing crates were found at Greyhaven," she continued, gambling that the riders had succeeded. "Cecily's list identifies every buyer. Your payments to Rook are already in Crown custody." A flicker of panic crossed Hargreaves's face. Rosamund had guessed correctly. "You still possess no confession," he said. "No, but you have just described your plan before 8 witnesses." His eyes widened. Alistair moved. He struck Hargreaves' wrist against the banister. The pistol fired, shattering a portrait above them. Both men fell against the railing. Rosamund ran forward as Hargreaves seized Alistair by the throat. The pistol lay on the floor between them. She reached it first. "Release him." Hargreaves looked toward the weapon in her hands and smiled contemptuously. "You will not shoot a man." Rosamund cocked the pistol. "My father taught me to treat wounds. He also taught me how to prevent them." Hargreaves released Alistair and raised his hands. Royal officers poured into the corridor. They forced the steward to his knees and bound his wrists. Rook was dragged from the archive moments later, his coat burning at one sleeve. Cecily attempted to flee down the servants' staircase, but Mrs. Wren locked the lower door and waited there with a fireplace poker until the officers caught up. When the danger had passed, Alistair remained seated against the banister. A thin line of blood ran from his temple. Rosamund knelt automatically, drawing a clean cloth from her pocket. Then she stopped. He looked at the cloth in her hand and seemed to understand why she hesitated. "I believed them," he said. "You chose to." The distinction struck him harder than any accusation. He closed his eyes. "Rosamund, not here." She handed the cloth to an officer and rose. Sir Gideon emerged carrying a bundle of ledgers rescued from the fire. "Your Grace," he said to Alistair, "Lord Harrow has petitioned to seize your estates at noon tomorrow. Unless we prove his loan financed the conspiracy before the Chancery hearing, every tenant in Briar Glen may still lose their home." Rosamund looked at Cecily's list. It proved the theft, but the loan agreement contained no reference to poison or stolen relief supplies. Harrow would claim he had merely lent money to an ambitious duke and knew nothing of Hargreaves's crimes. Hargreaves began laughing as the officers took him downstairs. "You found what I allowed you to find," he called. "The only page bearing Harrow's true instructions has already left the estate." Rosamund stepped into his path. "Where is it?" "At this very moment, it is traveling to London inside the one carriage no royal officer would dare search." His gaze slid toward Alistair, the Duke of Vales. Alistair's carriage had left for London 20 minutes before his return to Vale House. Hargreaves had instructed the coachman to deliver a sealed trunk to Lord Harrow's residence, claiming it contained documents required for the Chancery hearing. Sir Gideon immediately sent riders after it. "They will not catch a fresh team before the western toll road," Rosamund said. Hargreaves planned the timing. Alistair pressed a cloth against his bleeding temple. "There is a shorter route through Ashcombe Wood. The bridge collapsed last winter. I ordered a temporary crossing built for estate wagons." Rosamund looked at him sharply. "You never entered it in the road accounts." "Hargreaves advised me not to. He said smugglers would discover it." Another secret placed in the steward's hands. Alistair lowered his gaze. "I will show you." Sir Gideon refused to release him from royal supervision, so they traveled with 4 officers. Rosamund rode beside the inspector, while Alistair led them toward the forest. They reached the temporary bridge at dawn. Fresh wheel tracks cut through the mud, but the carriage was nowhere in sight. Beyond the river, the tracks divided. One path leading toward London, the other toward an abandoned hunting lodge. Rosamund dismounted to examine them. "The London tracks are too shallow," she said. An empty carriage went south. The loaded one turned east. They followed the deeper marks. At the lodge, they found the Vale carriage concealed beneath branches. The horses were gone, and the coachman lay unconscious beside the door. He was alive, with a swelling behind his ear. Inside, the seats had been cut open. No trunk remained. Rosamund searched the floor and found a torn strip of red wool caught on a nail. "Harrow's servants wear red livery," Alistair said. A second set of hoofprints led toward the river. Lord Harrow's men had transferred the trunk to horseback and doubled back toward Greyhaven, expecting pursuers to continue to London. Sir Gideon dispatched 2 officers ahead. Rosamund remained beside the coachman until he regained consciousness. "Hargreaves gave the trunk to 2 men near the bridge," he whispered. "They said it must reach the wharf before the morning tide. A ship could remove the evidence from England within hours. They rowed hard for Greyhaven. The wharf appeared shortly before noon. Royal officers had already recovered the stolen relief crates, but a small cargo vessel was pulling away from the dock. A man in red livery stood aboard, holding the sealed trunk. "Stop that ship," Sir Gideon shouted. The captain ignored him. Rosamund saw a line connecting the vessel to a towing horse, moving along the canal bank. She spurred her horse toward it and cut across the towpath. "Rosamund!" Alistair called. She reached the animal, seized its bridle, and pulled it sideways. The tow line slackened. The vessel drifted toward the reeds as officers boarded from a smaller boat. The man in red tried to throw the trunk overboard. Alistair leaped from the dock, caught its iron handle, and struck the water with it. The weight dragged him beneath the surface. Rosamund grabbed the tow line and shouted for the officers. Together they pulled Alistair and the trunk toward shore. He emerged coughing, one hand still locked around the handle. "I nearly let them take everything from you," he said. "You did let them," Rosamund replied. "Now help me recover it." The trunk contained letters between Hargreaves and Lord Harrow, payments to Rook, and orders to contaminate the lower well. But beneath them lay another document bearing Alistair's signature. It authorized Hargreaves to use all necessary measures to clear Briar Glen before Harrow seized the land. Alistair stared at it. "I signed this 3 months ago." He said it concerned unpaid rents. Sir Gideon's expression remained severe. "Your intention may be disputed. Your signature cannot." A clock began striking noon in the distant town. The Chancery hearing had begun, and Lord Harrow now possessed a document suggesting the Duke himself had authorized the removal of every family in Briar Glen. Rosamund reached the Chancery Court shortly before 1. Lord Harrow stood before the judge, arguing that Alistair's unpaid debt entitled him to seize the farms surrounding Briar Glen. Several London reporters occupied the gallery, already copying his claim that the Duchess had fabricated a quarantine to hide stolen relief funds. Rosamund entered carrying the recovered trunk. Sir Gideon followed with royal officers. Alistair walked behind them, soaked from the river and under formal crown supervision. Lord Harrow's confidence faltered. "My lord," Rosamund addressed the judge, "the loan before this court financed a conspiracy to poison Vale tenants, steal crown medicine, and force families from land Lord Harrow intended to acquire." She presented the letters, payment records, route book, Cecily's hidden list, and the authorization bearing Alistair's signature. Harrow seized upon the last document. The Duke authorized the clearance himself. If a crime occurred, it was committed under his authority. Every face turned toward Alistair. He could deny understanding what he had signed. He could blame Hargreaves and protect his title. Instead, he stepped forward. "The signature is mine," he said. "I signed without reading because I trusted my steward more than my wife. When Duchess Rosamund warned me, I stripped her of authority and publicly accused her of creating the crisis. My choices allowed the scheme to continue." A reporter's pen raced across the page. Alistair's voice tightened, but he did not stop. "I also authorized the attempted destruction of the village schoolhouse after Hargreaves claimed my wife had stolen the supplies. The blame for those decisions belongs to me." Rosamund watched him surrender the reputation he had once valued above her safety. Lord Harrow called the letters forged. Sir Gideon then produced Cecily's blue cloak. The clay on its hem matched Greyhaven Wharf, and the document sewn into its lining listed the stolen crates. Rook's payments connected Hargreaves to the poisoning, while Harrow's letters specified the date the village must be emptied. The judge suspended the seizure and ordered Lord Harrow detained pending a crown trial. Yet before the guards reached him, Harrow drew a folded certificate from his coat. "You have saved the tenants temporarily," he told Rosamund, "but not yourself." The certificate showed that Alistair had pledged Rosamund's marriage settlement as security for his political loan. If upheld, she would lose her independent income, her childhood home, and every fund she had used to support the infirmary. Alistair stared at the document. I never pledged her settlement. Harrow smiled. Your signature says otherwise. Rosamund examined it. This signature was not forged. Alistair had signed the page himself, and the court would reconvene the next morning to decide whether his wife must pay for his ambition. The court reconvened the next morning. Lord Harrow's solicitor presented the certificate as a lawful pledge of Rosamund's marriage settlement. Alistair's signature was genuine, and the paper bore the Vale seal, but Rosamund noticed what was absent. My settlement was established before my marriage, she told the judge. It cannot be pledged without the signatures of both trustees. The certificate contained neither. She then produced the original settlement from the archive. Its seal carried a tiny rose beneath the Vale stag. Harrow's certificate lacked that mark, because Hargreaves had used the newer estate seal Alistair gave him. The judge declared the pledge fraudulent. Rosamund's property, income, and childhood home remained hers. The recovered correspondence proved the rest. Lord Harrow had financed the theft. Hargreaves had contaminated the well and forged Rosamund's orders. Cecily had coordinated the missing wagons, and Rook had poisoned recovering patients and killed the driver. Harrow and Hargreaves were committed for trial. Their assets were frozen to repay the crown and compensate Briar Glen. Cecily lost her inheritance claim and faced prosecution as a conspirator. Rook agreed to testify in exchange for avoiding the harshest sentence. Alistair was not imprisoned, but the Crown removed him from every county office. His political campaign ended, and he was ordered to sell his London residence to repay the remaining relief costs. Before the court and the reporters, he spoke without excuse. I abandoned my wife among people I believed were diseased. I accused her publicly, deprived her of money and authority, and trusted those who flattered me because her truth wounded my pride. The villagers survived because Duchess Rosamund acted after I refused to. He transferred the Briar Glen farms into a protected trust, controlled by Rosamund, and elected tenant representatives. He also funded a permanent clinic from the sale of his horses and surrendered all authority over her settlement. Months later, the schoolhouse reopened as the Briar Glen Infirmary. The villagers asked Rosamund to remain as its guardian. She accepted, not as Alistair's representative, but in her own name. Alistair came once, carrying the treasury keys Cecily had worn. I do not ask you to forgive me, he said. I came to return what I used to humiliate you. Rosamund accepted the keys. I will not return to Vale House. Pain crossed his face, but he bowed. Then I will respect your choice. She did not promise reconciliation. Remorse could begin a change, but it could not erase abandonment. At the village gate, workers removed the final quarantine chain. Alistair stepped aside, while Rosamund opened it herself. This time, no duke decided who could leave.